Dan Severn is an underrated and awesome dude, mostly because he could kick your ass, but also he'd probably want to give you a hug. He's one of these individuals that's like really strong, but also lovely. And I would definitely strongly urge you to go on YouTube and watch the interview we are going to refer to today from Dan, because not only does he talk about his own WWE process and how the creative world works, he also mentions how somebody once proposed the idea of him having 666 on his forehead, essentially becoming a member of the Ministry of Darkness. I mean, who saw that coming? Now, the main reason Dan Severn turned that down is because he was from a small town in the USA, and he's quite a religious chap. He was like, I don't want to go to church at the weekends with my family and have the whole congregation looking at me going, oh my gosh, it's that guy, and he's totally crazy. Because listen, most of us know that wrestling is on the up and up, but you know how it goes. Some people just buy into what they see. There was an amazing fallout to all of that, though, because there was a time in WWE where you weren't allowed to say no, and it does tie into the Royal Rumble that almost became the realest Royal Rumble. And we had the greatest Royal Rumble, so why not do the realest? But yes, during this chat, Severn talks about the fact he said, no, I am not going to do this piece of creative, when the person who had handed to him said, well, that's totally fine. We were referring to that plan A, so would you like to know what plan B is? And of course, Dan said yes, otherwise we wouldn't be able to make this video. Because what they had come up with, if Mr. Severn was not down to this, was to have him lose a lot. And as always, read between the lines, you can see what's going on here, if it is indeed true. Now, over the neutral human being, Dan was like, okay, fine, but let's just have a little bit of a chat about this, and let's go to our contract, let's get legal involved, because actually, if you read this, nowhere does it say that I actually have to lose. Ruh-roh. Now, I'm going to say this is probably the sports entertainment side of Severn coming out. Let's not forget, he was a proper badass as well. I mean, you can go out there right now and watch him having proper MMA matches with Ken Shamrock. But he did mention, kind of whimsically, what if I woke up one day and decided, how about I turn this world of fantasy into a reality? I really hope he actually said those words verbatim. Can you imagine? It actually ties into something that did happen in 1996 when Vince McMahon first offered Kurt Angle a contract to become a World Wrestling Federation superstar. And Kurt has talked about this in his own podcast. He went, it's totally fine, but I have one proviso, I can't lose. Surprise, surprise, he was not hired at that time. Now, the threat that Dan Severn was making very clear is that if he wanted to, he could basically whip every single wrestler's ass, and that is totally true, because once again, he had a proper background in fighting. And I know some people like to go, well, he wouldn't be able to beat up Braun Strowman. That's not how it works. You can be the biggest dude on the planet, but if you don't know what you're doing, someone who does know what they're doing is going to absolutely kill you. So as the Royal Rumble was on the horizon, and because WCW was still around, Dan was like, well, you know, maybe I could reach out to Eric Bischoff, I could get a contract there, I could jump across, and beforehand, I will go in the Royal Rumble. And that's right, he was gonna beat everyone up for real and just throw them out the ring. So I've already told you this, it would be a real Royal Rumble. Let's not forget either that Dan wouldn't have told anybody this. So the people coming to the squared circle would have been totally surprised. So even if they did fight back, they'd also be contending with that in their brain. Once again, Severn totally knows what he's doing in his grey shirt and towel. My favourite part is that Dan even went as far to go, well, it is an entertainment show, so I'm sure it would keep going, before he did realise that he would imagine a bunch of individuals would rush him and get him out of there. And actually, that's quite astute. That's probably what would have happened. WWE don't like stopping shows. He would carry on though, because he was like, okay, that would get me out of the match, but it wouldn't get me out of the venue, which kind of insinuates that he was going to keep fighting. So again, this really is the greatest monologue ever. He also understood that it would cost him future opportunities, but would make him a mega badass if he jumped over to WCW. But his main point of contention here is, what is a man's word worth? Because I think obviously he'd been made promises by WWE, and now he felt like he was being double-crossed. Of course, things all worked out in the end, although Dan Severn did have a point here about the 666 thing. If he had have said yes and embraced what he called a goofy wrestling, even though I would call that crappy wrestling, because goofy wrestling for life is a good thing, that would have been his entire legacy. And it's true. Look at me here on YouTube. We would have made videos about this going, remember that time we made Dan Severn some evil devil guy? We probably would have forgotten about everything else. So it just sounds like Dan was very proud of his legacy and wanted to put some goodwill out there. And he even talked about the chats he had with Vince McMahon, saying, listen, Vince, it's not about money. I just want to make sure I do the right thing constantly. Listen, don't hear it from me. Go and hear it from the man himself. And if you react like I did to this, well, you probably believe him It just sounds like he's legit. He really just wanted to be a goodwill ambassador, and he did have due precedent with all of this, because when UFC had a terrible rap because people were criticized like, oh man, it's absolutely barbaric, Dan was one of the guys who'd be like, man, sit down with me, let me explain it to you. You've got it totally woefully wrong. I also think when you do break it right down, Seven just understands how wrestling works too, and that one bad creative decision can cost you your entire career. If nothing else, it can pigeonhole you, and remember, he'd already made a name for himself in MMA, he had his family, he had his livelihood, so by this point, he was just looking to have a good time and give something back to the industry. When it felt like the rug was being pulled from underneath his feet, he was a strong dude and he stood up for himself. Now, of course, the irony there is that if you had beaten up a bunch of people for winning the Royal Rumble, you probably would have tarnished that too. But once again, just to double down on this, I think he was saying it for effect. But I also totally believe he most definitely had the idea. I won't lie to you either, I want to see it. I want to go back to the late 90s and see how many people Dan Severn could actually throw out of the Royal Rumble. Because let's not forget, Ken Shamrock and him did coexist in that company. So if he had done it during a time when Ken could come to the ring, is that the trigger that WWE would have pulled? Meaning, we actually would have got the Ken Shamrock Dan Severn rematch, but it would have been in the middle of the Royal Rumble, and the winner would have been the first guy to throw the other person over the top rope. So I tell you, in 1998, the WWF made a terrible decision. They gave us the Brawl for All, when actually they should have given us this. Don't forget, Ken and Dan weren't allowed to enter the Brawl for All. I'm pretty sure you could work that one out for yourself. So it really is the most wonderful of tales, and actually goes back to that amazing thing that happens when you do watch wrestling as a kid. I always liked Dan Severn, but I really didn't know who he was as a person. And then you get old and you do have access to the internet. You're like, damn, we didn't do as much with him as we should have done. That's the breaks, I suppose. Just because you should get a push doesn't mean you're gonna get a push. Also, he has a wonderful moustache, and he took this picture with me at a wrestling convention. So basically, I love him. Now, I suppose while you can give me your thoughts on Dan Severn in the comments below, screw that. I would much rather you use your brain and pick someone who could actually survive in a real Royal Rumble. And again, don't just pick the biggest guy. I need you to think outside the box. Ken Shamrock is probably a good shout. You know what? There's sort of weird ones too, like Matt Riddle. He too used to compete in the UFC. Once you've been arguing about that as well, please do like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Click the video on the screen in order to check out more content from What Culture WWE, What Culture Wrestling, whatever the flub you want to call it. I don't know. I've been doing this too long and my hair has fallen out. But I appreciate you, my friends. See you soon.